Well, what a segment I have for you, so buckle up for it. We'll get to sort of the subject of this segment is Erin Burnett having a really good moment on CNN where she calls out Marjorie Greene's pro-Putin stances. But a few things to look at before we get to that that's relevant to this conversation. The reason why Marjorie Greene's coming up a lot recently is she's leading this hardliner attempt to get Mike Johnson in line and make him more extreme. And they are upset over two major things. It's this past funding legislation that Mike Johnson was for. Marjorie Greene, as we covered a few times now, is upset that he funded the DOJ and the FBI. She wants those to be defunded because she's for defunding federal law enforcement to punish them for holding Trump legally accountable. And also over the border, they're upset with Mike Johnson. And then more recently, this foreign aid package, they are upset with Mike Johnson for trying to bring to a vote. And now it's more than just Marjorie Greene. I showed you yesterday Thomas Massie. I want to show a compilation of a few different Republican Congress people seeming to join the ranks of Marjorie Greene in her effort to, like I said, get Mike Johnson in line or oust him altogether with this motion to vacate. And then after you watch this video, I'm going to tell you, this is so weird, about an acronym that these hardliners have created in the form of an organization that's FART. That's the acronym of this organization they've created. Very strange. But first, here's this. A few people upset with MAGA Mike Johnson.
For hours last night and proposed different paths for the speaker that would have avoided the abject surrender represented by his strategic choice here. There's no other way to describe it. It's surrender. It's disappointing. I won't support it.
It's disappointing. It's completely detached from what our base wants, what our voters want.
The strategy is not to try. I think the strategy is to fall on his sword.
So when I asked Congressman Chip Roy about whether or not it was time for him to oust Mike Johnson from the speakership, he said that he went right up to the line, Dana, and didn't go across that line, perhaps because he needs to talk with the speaker, which is happening right now.
Okay, so it's hard to understand their logic because it's not logical, but I'll try to explain what they're saying. The funding is sort of what we've been going over for a long time, which is if they don't get all the concessions they want from Democrats on funding the government and slashing a bunch of programs, then they get upset. Plus, this new thing of let's defund the DOJ and FBI to fight for Trump because they're prosecuting him. And then Marjorie's been saying that Mike Johnson's funding the open border, which just doesn't make any sense. I don't even know what that means. And so we can set that one aside. But now they're also, on top of it, as I said, upset with foreign aid. And specifically, the reasoning they'll use is because we shouldn't be prioritizing foreign aid when we should be focusing on the border. And I don't know how to word this in a way that doesn't make my regular viewers feel like they're experiencing deja vu all over again. But let me just quickly say that it is the same MAGA Republicans who blocked the border bill that the Border Patrol Union endorsed, who are now saying they want the border bill before they'll do foreign aid. So they're just completely being insane. So we don't have to take that argument seriously. But let me tell you about this FART thing. So I know it sounds like I'm the one being weird. You're about to see what I mean. Political reports. Conservatives in the House Freedom Caucus are signing up to take shifts to monitor the chamber floor in order to prevent their own party leaders from making unilateral moves that could curb their power. The Freedom Caucus's Floor Action Response Team, shorthanded as FART, aims to guard against an unannounced request to pass resolutions that would stealthily limit their leverage against leadership, according to two Republicans with direct knowledge who were granted anonymity to speak candidly. So amid this rage, backlash within the hardliners against Mike Johnson, there seems to be an effort by other Republicans. I don't even think you can call them moderate Republicans anymore. It's more so just people who don't want Mike Johnson ousted, who are trying to figure out, is there a way we can protect his speakership? And one of the ways could be when these hardliners aren't around, working to change the rules and strip these individuals of some of their power so that they can't oust Mike Johnson or throw the House into chaos. And it's an interesting situation, even more interesting that these hardliners are so mature that the organization they're creating is shorthanded as FART to monitor the House floor to make sure something doesn't stealthily get through that removes some of their power. So that's what's going on. You saw, again, some people joining Marjorie Greene in this backlash and wanting Mike Johnson's job, or at the very least wanting an about face on his part when it comes to funding of the government and foreign aid. And they demand action on the border, but when they get action on the border from Democrats and Biden and bipartisan Republicans, they knock it down because they don't want Biden to get a win on the border before the election. And that's where things stand now. With Marjorie Greene, just because she's the leader of this, it's a conversation analyzing what it is that is motivating her so aggressively to try to kill aid to Ukraine specifically, because that's her big sticking point. I listed off the other things she has issues with. She's really obsessed and hates the idea of any more aid going to Ukraine as Russia invades them. And we've gone through extensively the benefits, yes, to the Ukrainian people, but also if we're just thinking from the United States perspective, as I'm sure Marjorie Greene would only hear out these sorts of arguments, there are a bunch of reasons that this is in our geopolitical national security interest, and she just doesn't seem to get her brain around that. And so in thinking about this, why is she so obsessed with trying to prevent aid to Ukraine? Aaron Burnett addressed it.
Against a major opponent who does not want to give another cent to Ukraine, somebody who has Russia's backing.
Из Альянса призывает Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is proposing for the U.S. to withdraw from NATO. She believes that Americans should help Putin win.
That's amazing. That's Russian state television. In fact, ever since Marjorie Taylor Greene started speaking out against helping Ukraine, Russian state television can't get enough of her. Look at all that. And don't just, listen to us saying this. I mean, listen to what former Republican Congressman Ken Buck told me.
Moscow Marjorie is focused now on this Ukraine issue and getting her talking points from the Kremlin and making sure that she is popular and she is getting a lot of coverage.
Moscow Marjorie, he calls her. Well, once Congressman Buck said that, the nickname took on a life of its own. And Greene does share, frankly, a lot of Putin's views on Ukraine. Take, for instance, this tweet where she accuses the Ukrainians of being Nazis. Well, you've certainly heard that before, right? Well, on Russian state TV.
A flagrantly brutal provocation by Ukrainian Nazis.
Now, this crucial bill to supply Ukraine, it details here, with more aid. And look, as I said, it is crucial. They need it. It needs to be done. But in a sense, gosh, time really mattered. Putin's military now has the momentum in Ukraine, and the head of the Pentagon's European command just told Congress, and I quote, the army, Putin's army, is actually now larger by 15% than it was when it invaded Ukraine. And just over the past 24 hours, you've had 71 battles across the front lines, 43 airstrikes from Russia to Ukraine, and Ukraine right now does not have the firepower to fight back. And that's how Moscow likes it. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, of course, seems to like it too, since she doesn't want any money going to help Ukraine.
And I'll play another clip from CNN in just a little bit of Democratic Congressman Jared Moskowitz also calling out Marjorie Greene over that. And it's a good moment. Make sure you subscribe to the channel first by clicking the subscribe button. Makes a huge difference. And then before playing that next clip, I have gotten no closer to understanding what this MAGA visceral hatred for Ukraine is, where that's coming from. And to be clear, this is not saying that if you have some difference with Biden's policies, you have some particular critique of the time frame or the approach or the type of aid or the amount of aid, or you want to have that conversation, there's a good faith discussion to be had, and a rational political discourse can allow that. Totally. That's not going to get you called pro-Putin, as is being alleged here. But instead, it's this Marjorie sort of MAGA contingent that has this weird visceral hatred for Ukraine, and that motivates them to lie. And that's the issue. It's not a policy difference. It's extreme dishonesty in favor of the invading power. And We've seen and covered these conspiracy theories Marjorie Greene has pushed to the detriment of Ukraine, her randomly mocking the attire of Zelensky and seeming all angry about the shirts he wears. Like, where is that coming from? I don't understand how that fits in this conversation. Then lying about what the path to peace is. And that's what's really dangerous. Taking the responsibility off of Putin and putting it on Ukraine, saying they and their allies are the ones causing the continuation of this war. That's the reason that these parallels are being made. That's the reason Russian state media loves Marjorie Greene and is bolstering her messages. To give you a sense of a recent example of this dishonesty from Marjorie Greene, she wrote this on X: if you want to fund the endless foreign wars, you should have to go fight them. That's why I'm introducing an amendment that will require any member of Congress who votes for the multi-billion-dollar Ukraine supplemental to enlist in Ukraine's military. So the underlying idea there is that the continuation of this war is prompted by our aid to Ukraine, which is one of the most absurd things you could possibly imagine, given that, as we've talked about before, really, Marjorie, as if she were watching, just really picture what would happen if Putin learned that Ukraine would be weaker. What would his reaction be? If Putin were to learn that Ukraine no longer had the support of the United States in the form of aid and our allies in the form of aid, how would that make Putin feel? What would that prompt him to do? Probably he would be more motivated because he would realize the ambitions he has, the horrific goals that he's trying to enact here, would be more likely to be successful in a situation where Ukraine doesn't have the aid that it needs to defend itself. How on earth would it make sense for Putin to go, okay, now it's going to be easier to do what I want to do, and that's why I'm going to stop invading? It makes absolutely no sense. But they pretend like us helping Ukraine defend themselves, which is really the only path to peace here, preventing Putin from thinking he can go further. They're pretending like that's what is continuing this war. And it's incredibly dishonest, and it is the talking point of Putin, and that should be called out. Here's Jared Moskowitz doing just that.
Well, first, I mean, look, based on what Marjorie Taylor Greene's been doing, that's why today I filed an amendment. It's in the system, which would name her Congress's special envoy to Putin. So that way we can just make it official, quite frankly. As far as the motion to vacate, we're going to a caucus meeting at 9 o'clock. I'm going to listen to what Hakeem Jeffrey says. I think, as you saw, the caucus has the utmost respect for our leader, which is why he's able to keep the entire caucus together. I mean, he's been tremendous. This doesn't happen without his leadership. But look, I have said this before, and I will say it again. There is not a circumstance where I sit in the people's house and allow Marjorie Taylor Greene to throw the world into chaos and to embolden China, to embolden Russia by letting her garbage stop us from standing by our allies. What would the message be to the world? Not just Ukraine and Israel, all of our allies. They will look at us now as not dependable. They will say democracy is on the decline. Democrats are not going to stand for that. I imagine I'm going to hear something like that from Hakeem Jeffries today.
In Jared Moskowitz fashion, doing so in a sort of tongue-in-cheek way, making Marjorie Greene Congress's special envoy to Putin. But again, him trying to push back on the dishonesty from Marjorie Greene. And I've now gone through a few times on the show just my bewilderment about the reasoning for MAGA. What is going on here? Where is this pro-Putin, anti-Ukraine sentiment coming from? And the only thing that's really simple that I brought forward for you all is that they want to oppose everything that Biden's for. And since Biden's very powerfully for Ukraine, they want to be against Ukraine. And then you can get into broader ideological ideas about the Russian narrative and what they're pushing and their ideology aligning sort of with MAGA, and that being a crossover. Authoritarianism right now is looking nice to Trump and MAGA. So there's that connection too, but it's just a very incomprehensible moment playing out here, and it should be called out as we just watched there. Let me know what you thought of all that. You know where, in the comments.